Good day. Welcome to another lesson on our Entrepreneurship Master Program. We're looking at how you build a learning organization. So in this skills program, we're looking at how can businesses or small businesses specifically develop a culture of learning, meaning continuously learning so that they can remain competitive or they can build their competitive advantage and make sure that they develop their employees. And by developing their employees, it means better productivity. Better productivity will lead to profitability. So we're looking at this skills program. We already looked at how do you design an outcome-based learning. And an outcome-based learning is a learning interventions that are based on outcomes, not based on output. Historically, or in many organizations, not necessarily even historically, many organizations conduct trainings for the sake of trainings, to meet their B score or to be seen doing something without actually measuring the outcome. And those organizations like government, okay, I know it's a ignorant and blanket statement, but like a fund government, there are certain training interventions that they budgeted for. They just conduct those training so that they can meet their output to say you have conducted training. But the question is, were those trainings based on specific outcomes, and have you achieved those outcomes? So that's as well. I don't blame them much because how do you measure an outcome of a training? Because a training is to capacitate an employee. Yes, you can see an improved performance on specific issues or any specific matters that you have trained the employee on. But generally, it sometimes becomes too difficult. Not too difficult, but it becomes difficult and a little bit murky in terms of how you assess if you achieved your objectives of the training intervention. And as well, to assess the training, it's also how the training gets facilitated. It becomes very, very important. So today we're looking at the key component of a learning organization in terms of how do you facilitate training as a learning organization. Obviously, there are various methods that can be used to facilitate training, right? It might be a formal training where they register for a course and they go attend classes and they get the certificate. Or it could be a mentorship type of intervention where it's on the job training, where maybe you identify, or the employee or the HR department or you as the business manager or entrepreneur, you identify that there is this weakness. Maybe you picked up from the end product or based on the feedback from customers or based on the feedback from managers or end colleagues. You say, no, there is this training gap that needs to be addressed, but to address it, you use internal resources like your appointed mentor to say, please mentor this individual. This is the objectives that you want to achieve, or these are the outcomes that we want to achieve. That's one other method. And the other method, it could be attending seminars or symposiums or industry conferences where you learn about what's going on and the new methods of doing things. And then the other one, it could be a combination of these methods where one, there's on-the-job training, two, there is learning from your colleagues or in a team where projects are done in a team and knowledge is shared amongst the team members. That's a learning in a team, and also combining with attending formal classes. So that one as well, for me, I prefer that type of training where it's got the component of formality in it, and two, it's got a component of team playing or team engagement, because remember, people are not working in isolation, they are working in teams. So there must be team skills that needs to be built in terms of how to engage the team dynamics and all those things, so that an employee can be able to work as a team. And then the last one is on the job, which is now where you can measure outcome. So on the job, before we implemented this or we facilitated this training intervention, you were here in terms of performance. After the training interventions, we expected you to be here. Then you assess the performance to say, has the employee improved, or did the employee improve on performance? Did they move from one level to another? That's how you measure an outcome-based intervention. And not that the employee can recite or regurgitate the things that they've learned. Can the employee come back into his position or her position and perform the job better based on what is expected for that employee to deliver? And that is how you measure a training intervention, and you should facilitate it in a way that you will be able to achieve the outcome that you are targeting for that learning intervention. Okay, to ascertain or to determine how you gonna run the training intervention or how you're gonna facilitate learning in environment, first you need to do design the learning outcomes that you want to achieve and learning programs that you want to implement within the organization. So, and then how do you develop or design the learning interventions? First, you need to do the skills audit, as we said in the first module. You do the skills audit, you look at the interventions or the skills that you have within the organization, you look at what is required in the industry, you look at your mission and vision that you want to achieve. Then you take the skills that are required by your industry and the skills that are required for you to achieve your mission and vision. You check if you have all of them. Those you don't have, you put them in your skills gap, right? And then once you've put the skills that you are missing in the skills gap, then you develop your training plan. So you look at each intervention that is required and you develop the skills plan, meaning you need to decide how you're going to address that gap. As I said, that it might be through formal education, it might be through mentorship, it might be through attending conferences and all that, or it might be through a combination of the two, like a CETA type of qualification or skills program, which is, it combines on-the-job training with team learning and attending of formal classes or formal sessions. So it could be a combination, it could be one, or you can be maybe use the two or maybe all three. So it depends on the type of intervention that is required. Right. So the types of interventions that are required, then you can formulate the training plan, and with the training plan, then you need to decide on how you're gonna facilitate the learning. Are you gonna do it internally? Are you gonna appoint a service provider to conduct the training sessions, or employees will see to finish on how they acquire the skills? Or you're going to give them the bursaries to go to learn from a formal institution. So, okay, that are not exhaustive. You can look for donations, you can look for internship. Remember, once you identify the skills gap, it doesn't necessarily have to be a permanent employee that closes that skills gap. You can close it through learnership, where you get someone for, let's say, 18 months or 12 months, whatever, depending on the learnerships that are out there in the period. You get someone who's studying a certain whatever qualification, and they're looking for a host employer, meaning they're looking for a company that can host them while they are completing their their studies or their qualification. And generally, these are your CETA and QCTO type of qualifications. These are not your TVETs and your university qualification, because TVETs, they do practicals after. And with, yes, it's as well the TVET one, you can also accommodate them for a period to give them the practical component of their training. But with the learnerships, generally learners supposed to be in a work environment with the host employer, the person that will give them the practical experience over the period of the learnership. And then at the same time, they will be attending lessons and coming and implementing those lessons in your business. If you don't have the employees internally, you can look at available opportunities to bring in the learners on learnership, or for practicals for the ones who are from the TVETs, right? And if you don't get those opportunities, remember, you can also implement your own learnership. Let's say you are in the fast food space and you can see that your learners are lacking on, like the basic fast food skills. Then you can maybe implement a fast food learnership, where you train them maybe on a fast food learnership. You put them through the facilitation process, you give them workplace experience, and you formally assess them and submit their result to the CETA for them to get certificated. And that now you might have to fund it yourself, because there are different learnerships that you can do. There are industry funded learnerships where you fund the learnership yourself, or maybe the CETA issue learnerships, and then you apply, and then your institution gets appointed, then you get allocated learners who are on a learnership. So, and then if you do an internal learnership, then there are certain incentives sometimes when you do those things. I know there's a tax rebate. If you put your employed learners on a learnership, SARS will give you a deduction, a rebate of 80,000. So it's not like cash. You can deduct 80,000 from when you're calculating your taxable profit. Then you take out the 80,000. So you'll be paying about 22,000 tax less than that you would pay if you didn't have an employee on a learnership. I mean, 22,000 is a lot of money. It's basically the cash value that you will make as a business if you put your employees on a learnership. But it's if you are profitable, because if you are not profitable, then you wouldn't be able to get that tax cash benefit, because you're not profitable anyway. So you're not going to pay less tax, and that tax benefit will come in future when you are profitable. As I said, it's still a worthy investment, because one, you're going to get the cash benefit, but you're going to have trained employees that are a little bit more efficient, that are a little bit more competent. And if you have efficient and competent employees, you expect your customer service to be on point. You expect the cost or the profitability of your business to improve. So putting employees on a program, or on training programs, or on learnerships, and making sure that you train them where they are not strong, it will only help your organization. Yeah, sometimes you train employees and they leave, which is unfortunate. But they're saying that if you don't train them and they stay, what's going to happen? You might struggle to meet the customer demands or customer satisfaction. So it becomes a balancing act in terms of how do you approach it. Do you train your own? Okay, but you still have to train your employees. I mean, where you commit them to a formal learnership program. Or the option is, I know many organizations do that, they provide bursaries to employees, where they can go learn whatever that they need to learn, and then they need to bring in their results. So when it comes to facilitation of learning interventions, you can do it in different ways. So the bursary one it's a simple one, where employees, they apply, you give them bursary, and they go study, and then they need to work for you. Okay, not always, but you can put a condition that they need to work for you for 3 years after they completed their studies, or for each year that you paid, they must work for you a year. And then that's how you can retain the employees. And then on the learnership, obviously, then when the learnership ends, you're going to get the rebates if you are using the internal learners and you are the one who's funding it. But if it's a sector-funded or SETA-funded learnership, you're going to get a free employee because the SETA will pay their stipend, and you will get someone who will be able to assist you in the business to improve your operation. So learnerships have their own benefits, and because they are generally like 12 to 18 months, then you know you have an employee for 18 months that you're paying just the stipend instead of paying the high fees that you will pay to a normal employee. And they don't have the necessary benefits that comes with permanent employment. And the other one that is maybe an option is the mentorship one, where you facilitate the learning through mentorship within the organization. You identify your experts and you develop a mentorship program where your experts will mentor your employees on the job, which is one of the advantages, and it's a little bit cheaper, considering that you are not paying the employees for attending a course. You are not paying a third party. It's just that maybe they might be taking a little bit of time from your expert because he needs to spend time with them. That's the cost that basically you will be incurring as the organization. But because sometimes it might be higher than the actual bursary that you give to an employee to go study, because the time of the expert that the expert is spending with this employee training and all that, it might be the time that they could have used it to do certain things that will bring money into the business. So there is an opportunity cost when you are using your internal experts to train employees, because they could be using that time out there, maybe generating an income. And actually, having you train employees, I mean, it gives you a lot of advantages, because, I mean, to having your competent staff, it gives you that comfort that you'll be able to deliver on your customer service. And how you facilitate it as well. It might take longer if employees are just going to attend, to maybe wait for seminars within your sector, or it's quicker when you put them on a formal program to fast track their learning. But the main thing is they need to contribute towards the bottom line. That's the outcome that you need to challenge. And even the method of facilitation must be in a way that they contribute to your bottom line. And as you follow my lessons on this one, you know that I'm favoring this model of 70% of your facilitation or your implementation of a learning program. 70% employees need to spend 70% of their learning on the practical jobs, on the practical assignment, or within the workplace where they are actually contributing towards your goals. 70%, and then the other 20%, it must be engagement with the team, knowledge sharing, where they share with what they've learned, and so that the whole team can benefit from that intervention. And only 10% should be for the classes that they are attending outside, or the formal classes. It doesn't have to be outside. There can be the programs that you run internally. So now, how you facilitate your learning program, it will depend on where you are as an organization. Sometimes organizations have capacity to run their own trainings. You find that they have internal training managers, they have internal facilities to run their trainings. Like McDonald's. McDonald's had built a university called the Hamburger University, but unfortunately, now it has been closed. I think they closed it in the 2015, 17s there. I might be mistaken with the year. But since in the 50s, this university was there. It was developed to make sure that they train their employees. That's how they implemented or how they facilitate learning. So they've set up the whole, okay, it was not a massive university, but it was a reasonably big university where you get accredited formal certificate like you'll get from any other university. So that's how McDonald's decided to implement their training programs. That's how serious they took learning and development. That's how they saw themselves, and that was very, very important, because it's what made the difference between McDonald's and others. Because with McDonald's, they'll make sure that they train you. They'll make sure that they give you the skills. Maybe the little bit twist or the difference with the McDonald's training program is because they give you the training, but they give you the McDonald's way of training. It's not a formal qualification that you can go out and use it. So it was, in a way, their retention strategy, where they train employees on the McDonald's way. The employees become so efficient and well-rounded and skilled, where they execute their duties to perfection. But they don't have a formal education to back up their expertise. So, and McDonald's will pay them well, or they'll pay them based on the job that they are doing, and they'll pay them above market-related salaries given the qualification, right? So, why was it their retention strategy? It was because it is difficult for employees to find a similar job or similar positions outside McDonald's and the same amount that they were earning at McDonald's, because McDonald's will recognize their own qualification, but the public out there, other companies, they don't recognize that McDonald's certificate. So because an employee doesn't have the formal certificates to back the experience, then they generally get paid, they offered lower amounts than McDonald's will offer, because McDonald's do recognize the experience that the employee will have and the qualification that they've provided. So now, in that way, employees find it difficult to leave because they can't get jobs out there with a similar or competitive salary. So that's why I call it it was one of the retention strategies that McDonald's used to keep their employees. So you, as surprising as it is, you keep your employees by training them and paying them what they deserve based on the training that you have given them. And that now, it makes employee, okay, but generally you become loyal when an organization has trained you, they've provided you with skills. So you don't, those kind of employees, they don't easily leave. They say some leave, but there is a level of loyalty that they build. So if you train your employees, there is a level of loyalty that you will be building to keep your employees. But on the other side, for McDonald's, it was retention, because employees couldn't get competitive salaries out there in the market. So how you facilitate, it can make a difference. Because now, in this case of McDonald's, it did make a difference for them. They retain, the staff retention was a little bit higher. And you can also maybe fund employees, give employees bursaries to go study at the university, and you're not involved. They just come and bring you the results, which is it's a more passive type of learning intervention. It's still a learning intervention, but it's a little bit more passive. It's unlike a learning organization that it wants their employees to be actively learning while they are making their contribution, and their learning intervention should be linked to the outcome of the business. Remember, a formal qualification, yes, you will give the employee the knowledge and the skills, but probably 70% of the things that the employee is learning on a formal education at university, so they won't be applicable to your operation. Less than 30% will be. So there might be time and money wasted on output, not outcome of the training intervention. Yeah, the outcome can have positive impact on the employee, the retention of the employee, because most of companies, they say for each year we're paying, we need to make sure that once you complete it, you stay for a year. So it's like eye for an eye. Okay, not in that sense, but it means a year paid. If they paid for your studies for a year, then you need to stay with the business for a year. So it can be a type of retention strategy, but for me personally, in terms of the outcome, because remember we're looking at outcome-based learning. That's what you need to implement within. That's what is recommended. So it's not a must that you should implement, but that's what is recommended that you need to implement. So if you're implementing an outcome-based learning interventions, then how you facilitate them, it makes a difference to say, how will you be able to achieve the outcomes that you have set for this training intervention? It's easier if you are doing a mentorship program internally. That is the most effective way, but you also you might not have the experts to do proper mentorship internally. So you need a combination of maybe training experts out there that will give your employee the knowledge and the skills, and they come back and implement it within their organization. That will make a difference on the output. Okay. So when you're facilitating your training interventions, you must be conscious about it. You must be strategic about it. You must be intentional. You must make sure that you choose the most appropriate facilitation route to make sure that you get full benefit as an organization, right? But when it comes to facilitation as well, just be careful, because currently, like even your CETAs and the current policies around education, they say you need to put the learner first. So you need to prioritize the learner. It should be all about the learner. So whatever intervention that you're putting in place, it should be acceptable to the learner. It must be for the benefit of the learner. It must be to make the learner more competent. So it must be, the intervention must not be looked at from the organizational perspective only. You must also look at it from the learner perspective, because what you're doing, it must contribute towards the learner development. Okay, so as I've mentioned that with the outcome-based learning facilitation, it's about the learner. Yes, the institution will be the one is spending the resources, but the most important person will be the learner or the employee who's been trained or who's been developed. So you must keep in mind that the priority is the person who's been developed. Yes, the main objective, it will be to make sure that the company has competent employees and competent team, but you need to keep in mind that you must not ignore the rights and the interests of the employees. You must not facilitate or conduct a learning intervention without considering the learner or the employee who will be benefiting from the learning intervention. So that's the main thing when it comes to facilitating learning, and the learning that is outcome based. Yes, we want to facilitate learning that achieve a specific goal which is measurable, but it must also be an achievable goal, and it must be realistic when you are putting together a learning intervention or when you are facilitating it. So when facilitating, you need to engage the learners. You need to understand how the learner or the employee prefer to learn, because you can design a learning intervention but to only find out that it's not appropriate, or when you're facilitating it, you face challenges because like different people learn differently. So you must take into account the type of your workforce and the level of education. You must recognize their previous experience. You must take that into account when you facilitate learning. So there's a concept of recognition of prior learning in our education system. What it means is sometimes people, they don't necessarily have the qualification or the certificate to prove that they know something, but they have the experience. They can show that they have experience. Again, if you give them to complete it, if you give them a task, they are able to complete it because they have experience. So when you're considering facilitating learning intervention in a workplace, you must also consider recognizing them for prior learning. So the process also follows more or less the similar route that the normal learning facilitation will follow. But in case of recognition of prior learning, you assess the employee based on the experience. Let's say you want, maybe the weakness is on, maybe you realize that you have a skills gap in, call it maybe management, right? And how are you going to facilitate that session? The first thing, you need to engage with the learner to see where they are. So you do what is called needs analysis before you start facilitating. So once you conducted the needs analysis, then you'll understand where your employees are in terms of the skill, so that when you start facilitating, you know how to approach it. Because you might find that, yes, you think you don't have people who are qualified to manage the operation because you don't have people with degrees or diplomas or whatever it is that you are looking for. But you might find that you actually have people who have the experience, but because they didn't have an opportunity to attend formal education, they don't have the certificate. So when you facilitate intervention, you need to make sure that you sort of interview them, you engage them before you start with the facilitation, so that you can understand what are their training needs, right? And once you understand their training needs, basically by looking at their skills, their experience, their background, and then you can either go full RPL, meaning you can put them through the process of assessment without necessarily facilitating the classes, the sessions, and them doing your formative and summative assessments. So you can bypass that and take them straight to them demonstrating that they can be able to do the job. So you'll assess them based on the practical implementation, that you give them an assignment to say, if you are managing, okay, here's a team, please follow the process in terms of how you'll manage people and all that. And based on the outcome of that learning intervention, you assess them to say, have they met the standards, the outcomes of that unit standard or that learning intervention. And you might find that they meet some portion of the learning outcome. Then you will facilitate only the difference between what they know and they can demonstrate, and the portion that they can competently demonstrate that they are competent in that space. So then if you introduce RPL in your facilitation process, then you'll be able to identify only or facilitate only on the gaps that they have in terms of that skill that you'll be facilitating. So RPL, but most institutions, most organizations, they don't implement that. And RPL is there to make sure that you don't make employees or the delegates go through the whole process or do theoretical things that they already know. From the employee side, it will save the employee time. And from your side, it will also save you time, because remember, when you're implementing a learning intervention, it takes time from you, from the managers, from the employee, and from the training provider or the person that needs to facilitate that learning. And we know time is money. So you need to recognize that there is something called recognition of prior learning, where you can recognize employees or your team for previous experience, but they must be able to demonstrate that they are competent in that skills program or in that learning intervention, whatever the outcome that you wanted it to be. Remember, when you're designing a learning program, an outcome-based learning program, you've identified the key outcomes that you wanted to see. So when it comes to the intervention or the facilitation of that learning program, you also consider what are the learning outcomes that I wanted to achieve. Then you look at the competency or the skills of the employee. Then you see where are the gaps, so that you can only facilitate on the gaps that the organization or the employee is lacking. Because facilitating learning is about closing the gaps that you have identified. Which gaps are those? These are the gaps that you identified when you assessed your competency as an organization. You assessed what is required in the industry. You assessed your vision to say, for me to achieve this vision, I need to have these skills. And you compare what you have and what is required. And once you ticked off the ones that you have, you'll remain with what you don't have within the organization. So when you're facilitating learning, you're only facilitating learning on the skills that are required but you don't have. And then when you come to the employees, you also assess the employees against the skills that you say you don't have. They might have some to a certain level, so that when you design your facilitation, the facilitation addresses the gaps between what you want to achieve with that learning intervention and what the employees already have. And then you only facilitate on the difference, so that your interventions are more effective. You don't just repeat everything that the employees already have. And the facilitation, it must also be evaluated, right? When you're evaluating the facilitation, obviously, when you must have a facilitation plan. In the facilitation plan, you must identify the outcomes that you want to achieve when you're facilitating the learning. Look, when I'm saying facilitating the learning, it doesn't mean you, as an individual, you need to facilitate it. But I'm referring to the organization. Because the organization would have identified the gap, the skills gap, and they will be facilitating the learning, getting employees to be competent on the gaps that have been identified, the skills gap that they have been identified. So then, after you have assessed where the employees are, and you start with the facilitation process, where you're training them, the sessions, whatever that they need to do. That process, it also needs to be assessed. Not necessarily assessing the employees, but assessing the facilitation process. So what you need to do is, when you start facilitation, you must have a facilitation plan. Facilitation plan, it will show the outcomes that you want to achieve, the activities that needs to take place during the process of facilitation. It gives you the timelines on when the facilitation will start, when the facilitation will end, and then what are the expected outcome. And there are certain things that you need to take into account. Like when you facilitate, there must be the end goal in mind, to say, we're facilitating this session, but we want the employees to be competent in 1, 2, 3, 4. Because at the end of the day, the employees need to be assessed if they are competent. I'm going to go into how you assess the learning intervention on the next module, but for now, we'll focus on the facilitation process. So after the facilitation, then there must be a 360 evaluation of the whole process. There must be the sponsor who assesses the program to see if it's what they wish it was. the facilitation achieve the goals that it's supposed to achieve. And then there's also the facilitator, who will assess the facilitation process from the facilitator point of view, to say the learning intervention that was designed, was it appropriate for the outcomes that they wanted to achieve. And he will indicate the learning from the facilitation to say, these are the lessons learned, these are the mistakes that we made, these are good things that have been made from the intervention. And as well as the learner will assess the facilitation itself, to say the process, was it convenient, was it relevant, did it achieve what it's supposed to, is it what he expected or she expected. And you also evaluate the quality of the material that have been used. Remember, we designed the outcomes, the material that we're going to use to facilitate this. And when I say design, I don't mean you designing it, but you decided in which material this intervention will use. So the learner as well needs to evaluate the material, needs to evaluate the session, he needs to evaluate the quality of the facilitator, and also give inputs on if it achieved his or her expectation, so that the facilitation interventions are assessed, so that in future you'll be able to improve on how you facilitate learning within your organization. And you must try, because as I said, that you need to consider RPL, because if you're considering RPL, then it will reduce the time that you spend training employees. You'll only focus on the gaps that are there, and it will be more efficient in that way. Because remember, training takes employee away from their day-to-day operation, and you don't want your employee to be away from what they're supposed to be or what they were hired to do, because they are on training. Even though we're saying training is critical for the organization to be sustainable, to be competent, to be competitive out there. Because if you are not training your employee, you will lack, you will have weaknesses. There's certain things that you may not execute the way you're supposed to. So you might lose reputation outside the organization if you're not training your employees. But you can't afford employees to be attending trainings the whole year as well. So it's a balancing act. So the RPL helps you to balance employees being on training and them being able to still function and do what they were supposed to do or what they are hired to do. So it's a balancing act, and a successful organization trains their employees. If you're not training your employees, then you can still be successful. I mean, it's not a guarantee that you will not be successful. Or the fact that you are training your employees, it will not necessarily make you your organization successful. But it will, one, motivate employees to know that you have their best interest at heart, because you are developing them. Because they will see progress in their career. They will see that at least they are learning new things, new way of doing things. So that will generally keep them motivated. And but the most important one is you will make your organization a learning organization, meaning you will continuously learn, you will continuously do things better, you will continuously improve. And as you improve your service, it will improve your customer satisfaction. And with your customers, customers are key. A customer is a key. So customer is key. So you need to make sure that all that you're doing, the interventions that you're doing, you focus on the outcome, which is to make sure that you provide your customers with consistent service that they are expecting from you. That's on the intervention, how you facilitate it. You must make it as convenient as possible. You must make it as less stressful as possible. And remember now, with the age that you are in now, is the age of the technology. there are a lot of online classes that you can facilitate. So when you're facilitating, yes, remember the facilitation now, maybe the focus have been on the actual formal facilitation where they attend sessions. But remember, as we indicated earlier, that a learning intervention can be facilitated through mentorship, where these people, the employees that have training gaps or skills gaps, they are mentored when they are doing that. While they are working, they have been mentored, or it can be facilitated through a formal education where they register at university, or it can be facilitated through maybe attending industry conferences and symposiums and all those things, or it can be facilitated through the learnership with the CETAs. Now we're moving towards the QCTO. And then with the facilitation, it can be physical, where your employees are attending sessions, or it could be online, because now, since COVID, I mean, there's where the world is moving to online, and that even the training programs now, they are slowly moving the programs online. So you can also facilitate it even within organization, provide them with online courses where they can do it on their own time, while during the day they are practicing whatever they've learned online at work. So they will also be doing what you hired them to do, and while later on they are learning using the online or whenever. So the online makes the learning a little bit more flexible. So as a business, you need to consider if there can be other learning interventions that can be facilitated online instead of physical, where employee needs maybe to travel to the training venue. Yeah, you need to pay for the training venue, and all that is time consuming. Employee can attend a learning intervention or a training while they are in the office, because now we are in the age of online learning. Now we're going to look at we've looked at the learner, we looked at the learning intervention when it comes to facilitation, and then now we're going to look at the facilitator, because facilitator is key in the delivery of the facilitation. But in this case, when I say the facilitator, remember you'll have different interventions that are facilitated by different facilitators, but there must be a facilitator guide that you use when you facilitate interventions. So remember, what you're going to do is that you're going to do your skills audit, you're going to identify the gaps, and you're going to identify the interventions that you need to implement within the organization, so that you improve or you close the skills gap, so that you build a competent organization. So now when it comes to the facilitator, you need to have standards, or you need to have guidelines that you use for facilitating learnings in your learning environment. So generally this thing is referred to as a facilitator guide. It shows what needs to be facilitated, what are the objectives, how they're supposed to be facilitated, and what's supposed to be facilitated, and the outcome of the facilitation. So the facilitator guide, in a way, is what will guide how your organization implement the facilitation process. And with the facilitator guide, the main thing is, one, the delivery must be conducive, it must be appropriate, it must if there's an objective that needs to be achieved, there are certain notional hours that you need to give to it, to give the learners an opportunity to prepare and opportunity to be assessed. And with the facilitation, you need to conduct what is called formative assessment during the facilitation process. So with the formative assessment, you need to consistently gauge where your employees are in terms of understanding the learning, or understanding what is the learning outcome. Are they progressing the way they should? Do they have a understanding of the intervention that you are putting in place? So with the formative assessment, it should be done regularly by the facilitator so that they will know in time before you get to assessment. They will know if the learners are progressing the way they're supposed to be progressing, or if there's any special interventions that needs to be put in place so that the learners are learning the way they're supposed to be learning and they're progressing according to the timelines that have been allocated. And then it's important when it comes to selecting the facilitator, because the facilitator that you select to facilitate your learning intervention must be a expert, a subject matter expert, meaning they must know the topic that they are facilitating. Right, the fact that you might have someone who did teaching in the organization, it doesn't mean they might know how to facilitate, but they might not be the subject matter expert. And if they're not subject matter expert, that means they might be skilled facilitators, but if they're not subject matter experts, then the training might not be effective. You might not be able to achieve what you intended to achieve. And that can also frustrate your learners, because it's so frustrating that you find that a facilitator doesn't know what he's talking about. And now it will cause conflict. It will demotivate the employees in terms of attending the session or completing the session. Right. And apart from the demotivating employees, and the facilitation might not achieve the desired outcomes, because you have desired outcomes that you want to achieve by implementing a specific learning intervention. So if you don't appoint the competent industry or subject matter expert to facilitate your training interventions, then you might be wasting time, money, and resources in terms of the lost hours that employees could have contributed, and you could have made profit, or they could have generated revenue for the company. So you mustn't just do a learning intervention for the sake of doing a learning intervention. You must make sure that you appoint a competent facilitator. It's for the interest of the organization and the interest of the learner, so that you don't do training and after the training they can't implement anything in the organization. They can't make a difference, because you can have excellent material that you have developed for this learning intervention, but if the facilitator is not experienced or it doesn't have the knowledge to facilitate, it might end up messing up the program, and ultimately you will not achieve what you wanted to achieve. Remember, we are saying you are doing this intervention to make sure that the organization is competent, to make sure the organization has the necessary skills to achieve its mission and vision and goals. So, and if on the other side you just appoint whoever, the cheapest that you get to facilitate your learning intervention, then you might not be able to achieve the goals that you want to achieve. And sometimes for bigger organizations that they have more than 50 employees, actually sometimes you need to have your skills development committee or your training committee, where they decide on different trainings that you need to implement, or okay, maybe we call it a skills development or training and development committee that will implement your skills plan, making sure that you do all the interventions the way you're supposed to. And if you don't have a competent training specialist, you can outsource these things to a independent training provider. Because sometimes the independent training provider, if they do your skills plan, they might want to facilitate your interventions. And if you allow them to do the skills plan, they can help you. They can come handy when you are applying for grants, when you are applying for learnerships and all that, because you don't have to always fund your training intervention. We as a country, we have a lot of money in education. So if you engage a training specialist or an accredited training institution, when you start with your skills development process, or when you are trying to develop your skills plan, then the institution that you appoint can even do the skills plan for you for free, because they know that if you secure the grant or if you secure learnership, then you'll appoint them to facilitate those sessions for you. So because now if you have a properly accredited facilitator or an institution that is going to facilitate, it will make sure that there are certain standards that are followed. And as well, because if you are implementing the learning intervention internally, you need to make sure that you have the quality management systems to make sure that the interventions that you are implementing will yield the results that you're looking for. And as I said, like after the intervention, you need to make sure that you evaluate everything. The learner evaluates the material, evaluate the course, evaluate the facilitator, and they indicate if they achieved what they're supposed to achieve. And the same thing happens with the facilitator. Needs to evaluate the intervention to see if in future there are things that you're supposed to change, or to make sure that you're continuously improving on your facilitation and how you facilitate your interventions. So it's very important that your facilitation process or your skills development plan is implemented with professionalism. It's implemented with a plan, so that you know how to monitor the performance. Because if you don't have a plan, you don't know what you want to achieve. And at the end of the facilitation of that intervention, you might not know what you're supposed to, how you're supposed to assess the facilitation process. What are the outcomes? What are you supposed to be measuring? But if you develop a proper plan and you have a proper facilitation guide in terms of how the facilitation must be conducted and the outcomes are clear, at the end of the intervention, you will be able to measure if it's making the difference in your organization or not. Because if you don't measure it, you won't achieve it. It's simple. So you need to be able to measure what you're supposed to achieve, so that if you didn't achieve it, you take the necessary corrective actions. Okay, and the last part that we will look at is the assessment of your learning intervention. Once you have facilitated the learning intervention, then you need to assess to say, is there any improvement from where the learner was before the facilitation started or before the training started, and where are they after the facilitation? Look, this is not about certificates, it's about competence, because the intervention must be building competence. So you need to assess the competency of the learners from before they started with the session to after the session. Then obviously you might give it some time, because some learnings you might not be able to assess it immediately after the intervention, but it must show in the outcomes. Remember, you identify these things as part of your strategy to say, these are the gaps that I need to close for me to achieve my vision. So after the facilitation, you're supposed to be able to assess, now, the skills that I've provided to my team, is this thing taking us closer to us achieving our vision and mission? Even if it's you are a one-man show, after you attended the trainings, you need to assess if you are doing things better. You need to be able to assess, where were you and where are you now? Did the the intervention make a difference in your business? And if it didn't, then you need to make sure that you take the corrective actions. But if it did, you need to take the positive out of it and implement other projects or other learning interventions using the same, more or less the same successful facilitation process that you use for this intervention, if it's possible. So the success one, you don't just leave, you learn from them how you did it, the things that they can help you improve other interventions. Then you take the learnings from there. But if you didn't achieve what you're supposed to have achieved, you need to learn from your mistakes as well. See where you went wrong, the mistakes that you made, and come with corrective actions. So that's how you facilitate learning in working environment, and you need to make sure that is one, the interest of the employee or the learner comes first, but that must be guided by the company's mission and vision and objectives that you want to achieve. And you mustn't forget that you are implementing this learning intervention to improve the organization's competence, so that you are competent out there. So it's very, very important to not do training for the sake of training, not facilitate trainings for the sake of it. They must be intentional and strategic. And for them to be intentional and strategic, they must be coming from your skills plan. And your skills plan comes from your skills gap. And your skills gap comes from your skills audit. And the skills audit is where you look at your competency that you have, the competency that is required by your industry, the competency that is required by your vision and mission, and you identify the gaps from there. And that will filter down to the programs that you eventually implement in your organization. And you don't just implement the interventions, you need to make sure that you evaluate their effectiveness so that you can take the necessary corrective actions if they're not effective. And if they're effective, you take the learnings from it and you incorporate them in your next learning intervention. That's it from me. That is our lesson on how you facilitate an outcome-based learning intervention. I thank you.